So recording has started. So good evening one and all, and good evening to our speaker, Dr. Samanta Sahu, and he is from Rajiv Gandhi Central University, Arunachal Pradesh, and he is my senior in the Hyderabad University. So being the convener, I will introduce him, and I have assigned the task of introducing the topic to Mukti Sahu, the lecturer, Bauda Panchayat Degree College. He is working with me on the topic of Mahanadi water dispute and Indian federalism. And I have assigned the task of introducing the topic to him. So let me start now introducing the today's speaker. So as I mentioned earlier, today's speaker, Dr. Sahu, he presently teaches in the Department of Political Science, Rajiv Gandhi Central University, Arunachal Pradesh. Prior to this present assignment, he was associated with Administrative Staff College of India, Hyderabad, National Institute of Rural Development and Public Relation, Hyderabad, and the Institute of Public Enterprises, Hyderabad, in different capacities. He has earned his PhD from the Department of Political Science from University of Hyderabad, and he was working on urban water policy and politics in India, broadly within the ambit of governance and public policy. He has several research publications both at national and international level, broadly within the ambit of governance and public policy. Dr. Sahu, to his credit, has co-authored 3 volumes on water governance, corruption in India, and issues of development in the Northeast India. And all these works has been published by prestigious national level publishers. And he has completed several externally funded research studies, one being financially supported by uh, LKY School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, etc. He was earlier selected for a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru, and a research award for teachers by the UGC New Delhi. And more importantly, he is a person who has, I think, who has recently completed a project from ICSSR on Mahanadi water dispute. So I hope that he is the right person for today's topic, understanding Mahanadi water dispute. So let me request to my scholar working with me, Mukti Sahu, who is also working on you know Mahanadi water dispute, federalism. So I request him to introduce the topic. You can start right now. You can unmute yourself and you can start.
Hello. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for giving me an opportunity to introduce the title of the today's webinar. First of all, good evening to all of you. As you know, the today's topic is the understanding Mahanadi water dispute. It is a conflict between Orissa and Satisguard. So before going to know about what is the Mahanadi water dispute, we must study or we must know when we open the history of the many major interstate water dispute in India, that dispute started by only 2 reasons. And first one is when the dams and barrages are being constructed by the upper riparian states and have not taken any consent or prior consent of the lower riparian states. And second was the allocations of the water quota among the states who share the same river systems. And one of the burning issue in the federal system of India is the Mahanadi River dispute between Orissa and Satisguard. And the dispute started in July 2016 when the lower parent state Orissa objected to the upper parent states on the constructions of the many water projects in the forms of dams and barrages. So Orissa said that if the project will continue, then there is the possibility of water to the lower parent states, and Orissa would lose its legitimate share of water. And Chhattisgarh government said that the barrage and dams had been constructed to check the flood water, which as the water flows to the Bay of Bengal without utilizing it, nor the natural flow of water. So since 2016, there is a lots of debate and discussion over the Mahanadi water dispute between Orissa and Chhattisgarh. And the Chhattisgarh government said that we have the first right to use the Mahanadi water, and then Orissa. Orissa said that Chhattisgarh government constructing a number of water projects for the special benefit to the industry, not for the farmer community. And Orissa deprived of it. Once the Brajamohan Agrawal, Chhattisgarh Water Resource Minister, said that the barrages which are undertaken by our government had been proposed to check the flood water and not the natural flow, natural water without any utilization of it. And Orissa government started a blab game between the Orissa and Chhattisgarh. Both government take care the Mahanadi water as their personal community, not as a natural resources or an ecological entity. Both government, they try to create a fertile ground on the Mahanadi so to provide or to harvest an electoral advantage. In 2017, Orissa government also constituted a negotiation committee to find out a possible solution of the Mahanadi River dispute. Many times, the Orissa Chief Minister Navin Patnaik also wrote many letters to the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, to intervene the matter and to resolve the dispute. But after the personal request of the Orissa government on 12 March 2018, the government of India constituted the Mahanadi Water Tribunal. So the tribunal has not yet given any judgment, final judgment of the Mahanadi issue. So this is the brief idea about the Mahanadi water dispute. So it is a great platform for us to know what is Mahanadi water dispute, who are the stakeholders. We must know also what are the complexity of the resource distributions, realignment of the state community, market engagement, and the consequences on the democratic spaces and structure in India. So now I would like to request or invite Dr. Samanta Sahu sir for enlighten us on your lectures. We are waiting for your voice, sir. Now floor is for you, sir.
So thank you, Mukti. So I hope Mukti gave a very brief overview of this dispute. Now I request Dr. Sahu to go into the deeper in this Mahanadi water dispute. So with this short introduction given by Mukti on the topic, now I once again welcome Dr. Sahu and I request him to start his deliberation on this topic. Dr. Sahu, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Himanshu for the kind words and giving the opportunity and introducing myself. And also thank you to Mukti Sahu, who eloquently talked about the Mahanadi issue and set the tone for today's discussion. The structure of the discussion that I have thought about, I'll talk about something like, in a broader context, the Mahanadi issue I'll talk about in a broader context, and I'll talk about some few minutes. I'll speak about the resources and contestations, how that has evolved over a period of time. Then I'll talk about water resources and contestations and conflict over water resources. We'll come to interstate water disputes in India, in the case of India. Then I'll quickly talk about the study that I undertook very recently, which Himanshu was referring to. Recently I've submitted the report, and the report has been accepted by the Indian Council of Social Science Research, New Delhi, which is on the Mahanadi dispute. Then I'll dwell upon some of the vital questions which are under discussion here, and which I try to address in the study that I undertook as part of the project. And towards the end, we will talk about the important issues, the outcomes, and then we'll conclude. I'll take about 50 to 55 minutes, so that we'll have some time for discussion also. And I hope I'm audible to all of you properly.
I can assure you that you are audible.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, when we talk about the, Mahanadi issue or water disputes per se, it reminds me, or it takes me back to one of the interviews, I can say actually, which I was attending for a fellowship program long time back actually, about 1.5 decades back. And in the board, why I'm talking this, you would understand in the course of time. In the board, when I did tell them that I want to research on the politics of water, the entire board was up against that. Water is all about economics. What is the politics about water, and how do you want to go about it? And that had a very electrifying kind of impact on my thought processes. And ever since, in the last 1.5 decades of my academic and research career, I have tried to dwell upon, what is water all about? Is it just about economics? Is it all about hydrology? Is it all about bureaucracy or managerialism? Or is it all about privatization and market? And it is in this context that I have, gone through a lot of literature, books, publications in different journals, and different kinds of things. One thing that has come across, that has come to my mind, I have conceptualized, which I would like to discuss here also during this discussion today, is Ramaswamy R. Iyer, who was formerly the Secretary, Ministry of Water Resources, Government of India, who has written extensively concerning water resources in India. In one of his masterpieces, Water Perspective, Issues and Concerns, published by the SAIS, he talks about, when we are talking about water, only from an economic perspective, only from a hydrological perspective, or only from a techno-bureaucratic perspective, technological or bureaucratic perspective, the vital questions of social justice we are omitting, completely being ignored in the process. And therefore, water is not just about, all this. Water also, has important value concerning, the socio-political questions that we are trying to raise here. And my talk would, center around this kind of discussion today. And therefore, I, try to talk about this. Towards the end, we'll understand how water is also about politics. Water is also, about political, bargaining. And somewhere, the failure of the bargaining process has led to what we, or where we are today. So we'll begin with some of the broader understanding. So, because when we're talking about water, water per se is not independent of the general body of natural resources that we're talking about, or resources in general. Because globally also, when we see, there is, contestations, conflict all around that has happened concerning the natural resources. And therefore, it is very vital that we look at, in a holistic point of view. And it is in this context I would bring in the discussion relating to resources and contestation. Now, when we talk about resources and contestations, all of us, we are aware, and it has been overstated time and again, that the importance of resources in sustaining human life and how vital it is for the human beings or the living beings on earth to have resources, clean air, clean water, or cultivable land, forest, everything, because they all sustain life on earth. And when we look at time immemorial to the ancient time, to the olden days, some sort of balance had been maintained in the way the resources were used and the growth of human civilization. This balance that we are talking about, this balance was very vital in terms of sustaining the life. And that balance that I'm referring to, this balance is at stake today. And somewhere there is a break in that balance. And because of that, we're talking about contestations over resources, we're talking about contestations over water, we're talking about contestations over forest, everything. So, what has happened, especially with the modernization process or the industrialization, the industrial revolution that happened in the 17th, 18th century or later on after that, human beings were able to invent new ways of harnessing resources. We were able to invent new ways. And when we were able to invent new ways of harnessing resources, that went beyond the nature's capacity to replace the resources that we could harness, we could actually exploit. And therefore, there is a insurmountable kind of pressure that has been built around resources. And in contrast to that, when we look at different kinds of actions, especially at the global level, the United Nations and many other agencies, at the national level, we have governments, local level, different kinds of agencies, and also activism. They are inadequate in order to protect the fast depleting resources. And what is the result? The result is exponentially depleting natural resources. And it is the case with water as well. It is the case with everything else that we see around, especially which are natural resources that sustains human life or living beings. And therefore, when this kind of a breakdown in that balance has happened, now there is a constant tussle or struggle over control over resources, access over resources, access to resources, or use over resources, or allocation to resources. And this entire thing has led to contestations and conflict surrounding natural resources, water, everything that we have around. When we look at these kind of examples, the literature at the global level, at the national level, at the regional level, local level, they are replete with examples. And the larger question is not only about the security of the resources, water security, air security, or land security, forest security. It is also about the larger question of human security. Now the entire living being, their security is at stake. All of us, we are aware about this. Now, conflict over natural resources that we're talking about, or even water also, they are not new actually. When we talk about, we may be coming across this very frequently now, but they are not very new. They existed. They existed earlier. Only thing, the intensity has increased, or the frequency of such conflict has increased over time. For example, we have the Rig Veda. In the Rig Veda, there is enumeration that there was battle among the clan chiefs or the tribal heads concerning control or access to resources. The rise or fall of great empires or civilization, be it the Roman Empire, the civilizations like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, or the Mayan civilization, and many others, they somewhere are linked to the way resources have been harnessed, the way resources have been exploited at times. And these examples are very vivid. So in the present context, in the contemporary time, when we look at the beginning of the industrialized capitalist economy or the post-industrial revolution especially, there is a widening of anthropogenic factors or pressure on resources, be it water, be it air, be it cultivable land, or be it forest. And therefore, the contestations, therefore, the conflict that surrounds these resources. Now, when we talk about the resources, two of the important people I would like to refer here. One is Adam Smith's The Laissez-faire Economic Policy and the conflict theory of Karl Marx. When we look at their works, it shows that the historical development of the entire human civilization is nothing but the struggle for power and resources. It's a struggle for power and resources. When we look at this phenomena, struggle for power and resources, think about the global West, which is largely known as the developed world, developed West and all that. Great wars have been fought for control and access of resources, be it World War I, be it World War II, and for example, the war that is happening in Ukraine today. Many of us, we are aware about the war that is happening in Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine. And largely, the notion that all of us we have is the NATO expansion, many things. They are there. They are also sufficient reason. But then somewhere, the region that Russia is trying to control, the Donbass region, is the industrialized, rich natural resource region within Ukraine. And therefore, this is also one dimension of the conflict that is happening between Russia and Ukraine today. Similarly, when we talk about World War I primarily, of course, the immediate trigger was something different. But then largely the thing went beyond Europe. It was like controlling or accessing resources in those colonies, like India, Africa, Asia, Latin America, everywhere. And therefore, the conflict, the World War I. So when we talk about the developed West, great wars have been fought. Now, when we look at the global South, in the global South, especially in the post-World War II, when after the phase of decolonization, new countries became independent, and several dozens of countries became independent. In this global South of the third world, which is termed as the third world, there is a paradox of the plenty theory. And what is this paradox of the plenty theory? Paradox of the plenty is these countries, they are very rich in terms of natural resources. But then they really do not have the technological advancement. Their level of development is not corresponding to the kind of resources that they have. So what is the consequent impact on this? The consequence of this is in A.G. Frank, the dependency theory I'll bring in here, where he talks about the first world as a metropolis and the third world as, or the less developed third world countries as the satellite countries. Just the way it happens in today's time, like we have metropolitan cities, maybe Delhi, Bombay, Chennai, Kolkata, many others around the globe we have. And the surrounding areas of a city, metropolis, they form part of the ecosystem or the satellite towns, and the entire resources of these satellite towns are sucked into the metropolis. Something of that sort, A.G. Frank talks about through his dependency theory, that the developed West, they are something like a metropolitan city, and the third world developing countries, because they do not have technological advancement, and that they are able to harness their resources. And therefore, what is happening is, the resources are being sucked into the developed. And this somewhere is linked, this particular notion somewhere is linked to that, new colonialism in the contemporary world. Now, this is a global kind of situation that I try to bring in. Now, looking at India, our national context, in the post-colonial times, all of us, we are aware about the kind of movements that has taken place, be it the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the most famous Chipko movement, and many more, numerous actually. If we go on talking about such examples over the protection of natural resources or something like this, these all are examples of contestations over control, access, and use of resources in India's case. And when we talk about India's case, there are three important resources: land, water, and forests. They are scenes of some of the most enduring struggle in India. So when we look at the entire case of India, somewhere poor resource governance, and several other, anthropogenic factors such as advancement in science and technology, or you have something like rapid population growth and so on. They are at the crux of such conflicts which have, increased, grown over time in India. Now, looking at the water, specifically in the water context or water resources, all of us, we are aware about the indispensability of water, and also we are aware about water stress and insecurity, which is rapidly increasing. All of us, we are, especially during the summer months, we are aware about the acute shortages of water all around the country in different places. Now, when we talk about the insecurity or the stress over water resources, very surprisingly, this has given rise to the possibility of cooperation also. When there is stress, when there is insecurity, this kind of situation has given rise to the possibility of cooperation. And we have examples. The cooperative game theory has been used. For example, in the case of the Mekong Valley in Southeast Asia, we have the Okaragago Delta in Africa, the Aral Sea Valley. These are examples where the cooperative game theory has been used to develop efficient and stable sharing. But then these are very few cases. The stress and insecurity of water has given rise to conflict, very frequently. And there are very few cases where we see, possibility of cooperation. And the conflict that we are referring to, especially concerning water resources in our time, they have become more diverse in nature. They are now more complex in their structure and frequent in their time scale. I'll bring in some statistics here. In the global context, I'll bring in some statistics. I'll try to quote some of the statistics. From 1900 to 1959, in about 60 years' time, there were 22 conflicts concerning water globally. And from 1960 to about 1989, in about 30 years, there were 38 conflicts concerning water. And from 1990 till about 2007, in about 15 years, there were 83 incidences of conflict over water. So we can just imagine. And when we talk about violent conflict, in 60 years, that is between 1900 to 1959, we had 19 times when conflict over water became violent. In 30 years' time, from 1960 to 1989, we had 23 times where conflict over water became violent. And in 15 years, it has become 61 times where water conflict has become violent. So this is that diverse nature of water conflict that we are facing today. In the first 60 years, we had only about 22 conflicts. In the subsequent 30 years, we had about 38 conflicts. And in the subsequent 15 years, now we have about 83 conflicts concerning water resources. This is the global statistics. So we can imagine how water conflicts have become more diverse in nature, complex in structure, and frequent in their time scale. Now, conflict in water in that context becomes a multi-dimensional issue. It becomes a multi-dimensional issue. And what is this multi-dimensional? At times, water conflicts relates to the control over water. Sometimes it is access to water. Sometimes it is the uses. And one of them we'll talk about here. Control, access, uses, all of them actually concerns the Mahanadi water dispute and all. Now, geographically, when we talk about water conflicts has involved different countries. It has become international. It has become national, intranational, within the nation, interstate, like we have Orissa and Satisguard. In the United States, they have. In other countries, they have. The different provinces, fighting for control, access, or using water resources. And at times, it has become also local. Local is much more frequent, actually, when we talk about all of us, we have, seen. Now, in the global context, when we talk about, I'll give some examples here. Somewhere I have taken note of it. The rise of sovereign states in the middle of 17th century somewhere provided a conducive base for such conflict, because when the sovereign states emerged, for them there was a desire to develop socially, economically, politically, and that is where that led to struggle for resources. So, for example, you have the hydropolitics and conflict in Central Asia between 5 different countries. We have these countries like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. And the conflict has accelerated with prevailing regional instability. It has led to regional instability in the region. Similarly, we have the Tuktugal Reservoir in, again, the Central Asian region, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. We also have water which has been used as weapons, weaponizing water. And the best example is the Middle Eastern countries, where you have Syria, Turkey, Iraq. Water has been weaponized. So also in Botswana, water has been weaponized. Now, when we talk about the national context, concerning India, we have some international conflict concerning water, and that concerns our neighboring countries like Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, Bhutan. We also have interstate conflict within the country, different states, federating unit that we'll be discussing. There are numerous. You have the Kaveri dispute, you have the Vyas dispute, you have the Godavari, Krishna, Periyar, the Mahanadi, the latest. And also we have local conflict or disputes concerning water. And this local thing that we're talking about is primarily about sharing and access, or at times control also. So when we are talking about the local kind of water disputes, crisis of governance at times, the water policy, privatization, the social construction of power structure in the society, Indian society, so on, have played a very prominent role in terms of the water stress or conflict that happens at the local level. Now, let us look at the interstate water dispute, the third kind of thing, transnational, international, local, and intranational. So, interstate water disputes. So when we talk about interstate water disputes in India, these conflicts, there are many actually, I try to give a list of them. They are not a mere conflict over existing water resources, but they are embroiled in the dynamics of ethnic, at times cultural, social, political, and also religious sentiments of the people across the states. And these sentiments concerning water across the states in India, they have metamorphosed into identity politics. What we have seen in the case of uh, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, at times Punjab and Haryana also. And slowly we would be seeing that in the case of Odisha and Chhattisgarh also. Now that there is a much more cohesive relationship between the people of Odisha and people of Chhattisgarh, we do not have seen the kind of thing that has happened in the case of Kaveri dispute. But then at in future there is every likelihood that that kind of identity politics would happen. Already it has started actually in different ways. Now, this kind of identity politics concerning water sharing between different federating units in India has far-reaching implications on the federal structure in India. It has far-reaching consequences. Some of these conflicts that I try to talk about is, I'll give a list of them, like the Kaveri conflict, primarily between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. There are also other states like Kerala and Puducherry who are part of this. The Godavari conflict between Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, now Telangana, Madhya Pradesh and Odisha partly. The Bias between Punjab and Haryana. The Narmada, Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. We have the Krishna conflict between Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. We have the Vamsadhara, Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. We have Mahanadi between Goa, Karnataka and Maharashtra. We have Periyar between Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And also we have the Mahanadi between Orissa and Satisguard, the latest addition into the entire. Now, we'll talk about the Mahanadi. Let us switch into the Mahanadi, the last of the dispute that I brought in, the Mahanadi dispute between Orissa and Chhattisgarh. 1 or 2 minutes, I'll talk about the research study that I undertook very recently, submitted report and have been accepted. It was a research study financially sponsored by the Indian Council of Social Science Research. And as part of that, I tried to look at the nature and character of the Mahanadi water dispute. How it happened, why it happened, and what is at stake, who is the beneficiary out of it, who is the loser in the process, and what happens to the Mahanadi per se. These are all kinds of questions that I try to address in the study that I recently undertook. And that will be the subject of discussion now. Now, when we talk about the conflict, the Mahanadi conflict, as Mukti Sahu in the initial remarks talks about, the conflict began in 2016. I would course correct somewhere here. The conflict did not, begin in 2016. It began way back in 1957 with the commissioning of the Hirakud, project. Once the Hirakud project was completed, from then on, there is a conflict that involves, Odisha and then Madhya Pradesh, not Chhattisgarh, because at that point of time there was no Chhattisgarh, it was Madhya Pradesh. So the conflict comes the 1957 when the Mahanadi project was commissioned. After a lot of dilly-dallying and a lot of deliberation, bargaining, there was finally the government of Orissa and the government of Madhya Pradesh, then government of Madhya Pradesh, they agreed on a proposed joint control board, JCB, way back in 1983. But then this joint control board never materialized. The idea was that the joint control board would have people from Orissa and from Madhya Pradesh, and then jointly they would manage the waters of Mahanadi. But then that never materialized. And in the year 2000, when the new state of Satisguard was carved out of the erstwhile Madhya Pradesh, the Chhattisgarh state not only inherited the Mahanadi conflict, it also inherited the entire legacy of the Mahanadi. And this is where we come to the Chhattisgarh situation post 2000. Now, when we talk about Hirakud Dam, which is very, very vital, there are three different kinds of issues which involve the Hirakud Dam and its commissioning in 1957. One of them is the issue of displacement. All of us, we are aware about the hundreds and thousands of people who were displaced when a project of this proportion happens, because Hirakud Dam is one of the largest earthen dams in the world today. And therefore, hundreds and thousands of people were displaced when the project was commissioned. This is one conflict that concerns the Hirakud project, the Mahanadi. Number two is the kind of thing relating to compensation to the PAPs. PAPs is the project affected peoples. Compensation to them. There are still people who have not been compensated, who were displaced from the Mahanadi region, the Hirakud region. And very recently, I think last year or so, one very good article was published in the Economic and Political Weekly, which talks about the project affected people and how they are still struggling to get their compensation from the government. They are not yet compensated. This is the second kind of thing. The third kind of thing is relating to the right to Hirakud water. The right to Hirakud water. And when we're talking about this third kind of thing, this is comparatively of recent origin. It did not originate with 1957 when Hirakud project was commissioned. It originated in the 1990s, especially in the post-liberalization phase. Once the liberalization, the LPG liberalization, privatization, and globalization happened, and post 1991 especially, the right to Hirakud water issue started to crop up, and this started to crop up between two important sectors or segment of the society. One, the farmers who were having uninterrupted, unhindered kind of access to Hirakud water or right over Hirakud water since 1957 till about 1990s, early 1990s. Post-liberalization, the scenario changed when industries started, setting off their industrial houses, around the Hirakud Dam, around the Mahanadi. And slowly, the conflict started to emerge between the farmers and the industrial houses. Now, when we talk about Hirakud, initially in 1957, when the Hirakud project was conceived, there were three important kinds of objectives behind it. One of them was flood control. The second one was irrigation. The third kind of thing was power generation. These were the primary objectives. But by 1990s, industries became overwhelmingly present. They became overwhelming concerning Hirakud, the Mahanadi water and all that. And somewhere this particular change in the political, economic situation of Orissa or in this Mahanadi Delta region, the government of Orissa made an amendment to the Orissa Irrigation Act 1993, and it was enforced by 1994. The irrigation department was reorganized within the government of Orissa. Okay, somebody is writing. Okay, so there was a rapid change that happened post 1991, and this rapid change concerned the industrial houses who started rapidly, started establishing their industrial houses around, the Hirakud Dam, around along the Mahanadi and all that. So by 2015, there were this is the government of Orissa data. By 2015, there were about 21 industrial houses which drew, 604 or around 600 cusecs of water from, Hirakud reservoir. So you can imagine, 57 till about 1990s, there were very scanty presence of industries, and the farmers had a unhindered kind of access to Hirakud water, the Mahanadi water. And now, within about 2 decades' time, the entire scenario changes, and the industries become one of the major stakeholder in something which originally they were nowhere in the scene. Nobody planned for the industries way back in 1957. And therefore, the first kind of thing that started in the recent, phase of the conflict concerning, Mahanadi water began in 2006, when the government of Orissa signed MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, with 17 different companies to supply water from the Hirakud reservoirs. There were about 25,000. Let me finish first, and then maybe you can raise me question. So there were about 25,000 farmers, who protested against the government of Orissa's this action, and they created a human chain of about 20 kilometers. That was in 2006. It further accelerated in 2007, when about 30,000 farmers, they stormed the entire reservoir area. They build a, imaginary or a symbolic demarcator called the Chashir Rekha near the, reservoir. They were trying to tell the industries, they were trying to tell the state government that no one else than the farmers are allowed beyond the Chashir Rekha, the farmers, the marketers, and all that. The government of Odisha was forced to appoint a 4-member committee, committee of members to hold negotiations with the people. Now, when we talk about the Mahanadi issue, why it is very vital, the question of, federalism, the question of interstate relation, the question of, politics or political stake in the Mahanadi dispute and all that. One perspective you would all understand, when we talk about the Mahanadi Basin comprises about 46 assembly constituencies in Odisha. That is 1/3 of Odisha assembly. 64 assembly constituencies in Satisguard, and it is about 2/3 of the number of total seats in Satisguard. It also extends to about 27 parliamentary constituencies, 13 in Odisha, 11 in Chhattisgarh, all of them in Chhattisgarh, 1 each in Jharkhand, Maharashtra, and Madhya Pradesh. And therefore, the Mahanadi dispute has enormous political stake, and there is enormous potential that this would snowball into a much bigger crisis that we have not seen so far earlier. Actually, in 2016, the Chief Minister of Odisha wrote to the center complaining about the barrages that Satisguard was building across the Mahanadi in the upper reaches and all that. And this is where effectively this particular thing became the genesis point where the conflict concerning Mahanadi became an interstate conflict. Because by this time, there were 12 different projects that the Chhattisgarh government had already started constructing, or in different, at different levels of construction. Some of them completed, of course. 2017 is a very turning point concerning Mahanadi conflict. The Panchayat election, all of us we are aware about. In Odisha, BJD has been in power for more than 2 decades by now, and at that point of time, in their fourth term actually, and they were actually fighting against the opposition, which was the BJP at that point of time. Not only in Odisha, BJP was in power in Satisguard and as well as in center, and therefore the equation of political parties, became very interesting, and therefore the Mahanadi conflict snowballed into a state level election or the national level election plank actually at that point of time. Now, some of the vital questions that we need to ask here, which I have tried to raise also in different ways, is why do we have so many interstate water disputes in India? Where have we failed? We have different kinds of institutions. We have the tribunals. We have the courts. We have different other mechanisms, but we have somewhere failed. Has the theories of competition overtaken the theories of bargaining? Somewhere there is a bargaining failure. Is it a bargaining failure? This is the kind of question that we can or should the cooperative game theory be considered to resolve the differences among states, not only between Odisha and Chhattisgarh, but among other state governments who are in a similar kind of situation. What kind of impact it has, the kind of conflict that is happening concerning interstate water, what kind of conflict, what kind of impact, it has on the state community, state market community, and community engagement. This has become very, very vital in the present context. Now, in another couple of minutes, I'll try to finish and then we have discussion. Now, when we talk about interstate water disputes, the laws, the policies in India are primarily sectorial, fragmented, and therefore that makes regulation a complex issue at times. Now, if you look at the constitution, water is in the state list, entry 17 of the state list. But then the power to regulate interstate water courses is with the center, that is entry 56 of union list. And therefore, I'll bring in some other data also here, especially when we talk about this kind of mismatch where water primarily is within the domain of the state to make legislate, but then there is also something which is part of the center which has a overwhelming presence. This has led to differences. Now, I'll bring in some very pertinent kind of discussion here very quickly. Ambedkar, who was the Viceroy's, who was part of the Viceroy's Council and a member of Labor, Irrigation and Power, considered water as a national wealth, and he advocated for a national policy for water, for management rather than sectorial water policies. And consequently, when the constitution was being framed, Ambedkar was the chairman of the drafting committee. All of us were aware. Water and interstate water sharing found special place during the debates in the Constituent Assembly and later in the federal scheme of the power distribution. And consequently, the Constitution has laid down certain arrangements for regulation of water resources between the center and the states. And when we talk about this, we have different articles in the Constitution which deals with this. Article 262, the Interstate Water Dispute Act 1956, which is drawn from Article 262. We have the River Boards Act 1956. We have Article 252, 246, and many more are there. There is a very complex arrangement that we have. And this institutional complexities where we have the states on one side, we have the central government on the other side, we have the courts, we have the tribunals. The institutional complexities has actually become much more complex concerning resolving the interstate water disputes in our context. Then the politics of vote. 2017, the Panchayat election in Orissa. Mahanadi issue was the only issue, the entire Panchayat election. But when it came to the 2019 general election, the assembly election, nobody talked about Mahanadi. When it came to 2022, this year, Panchayat election, nobody talked about Mahanadi issue. So somewhere the political class is not very committed in terms of resolving, such disputes that has happened over time. Now, on the other side, we have a reluctant or unwilling center versus the defiant states. The states are defiant at times, and we have seen this, especially in the case of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. They have gone on to at times disobey the Supreme Court's direction also at times. So this all has pointed to a situation where there is a weakening of the federal mechanisms or lack of federal, cooperative federalism in India, and thus a realignment of state community market engagement that has taken place. Now, I'll just conclude in about a minute or so. When we talk about interstate river water conflicts in India, in the post-independent India, they have seen continuous configuration and reconfiguration politically, and the existing or emerging conflict along the river basins in India, such as Mahanadi, manifests contestations of distributional politics. This is what we have seen. The market, in contrast, or the private sector, in contrast, has become a major player vis-a-vis the state and the constitution. The constitution was framed at a time, or many of these projects were conceived at a time when the market was nowhere near the scene. But when we are entering the 21st century, the market is a force to reckon. And when you have the market as the force to reckon, there is a process of realignment that has taken place in the politico-economic fabric of the country, leading to rupture in the social cohesion. And what is seen is callousness on the part of the state, constitution, institutions towards a significant section of the society when market dominates the arena of statecraft and policy making. So I'll bring in the beginning discussion that I talked about in the very beginning itself. Politics, all of us, we are aware, in the words of Harold Laswell, is about who gets what, when, and how. So the literature is replete with instances which advocates political processes, which leads to the culmination of a justified sharing of resources. And therefore, politics is the civilizing force. Somewhere there is a need for that Estonian, authoritative allocation of resources. Resources has to be authoritatively allocated when they are scarce. And especially in this case, when we talk about Mahanadi or similar kind of interstate water disputes, there is a need for the mainstream political forces to restrain using such disputes for their narrow political gain. Maturity of the political structure, maturity of the democratization process would have a very positive impact in resolving such kind of conflicts. The solution could be seen in a more, socially cohesive alliance of communities, social groups, who are the sufferers of the present callousness, rather than the other way around. And therefore, to manage water stress, a collaborative effort among every stakeholder is required, and that is the need of the hour. Possibly, when we talk about the water tribunals also, history is repeated again. In the post-independent time, we have seen the water tribunals have not been able to resolve any of the disputes that we see, disputes that I have pointed out during the entire discussion. any of the disputes that has been there has not been completely resolved. So somewhere the tribunals, the courts, these state mechanisms, they have lacked, they have failed actually, we can say. And therefore, there is a need for a realignment, a collaborative effort among every stakeholder so that we come out of this kind of quagmire. And our federal structure is strengthened, it is more cohesive. Thank you so much. I hope I was properly audible to all of you. I stop with this.
So thank you, Dr. Sahu. It would have been better if we would have heard you with your earphone, because many important points you raised, you gave a theoretical framework to understand in the very beginning. And, we understand Mahanadi water dispute. But I think we need to develop different perspectives to solve these, problems. And from the federalism perspective or federalism point of view, you suggested a collaborative approach must be there. And one of the speaker in some, in a web talk on my platform, he said that maybe Professor Sujana Mishra, that Indian federalism is not cooperative federalism; it is bargaining federalism.
Yes,
And
yes,
when
I agree
Indian
with you.
federalism or Indian federal state is a bargaining, federal state, in that, context, I mean, how to think about this collaboration when politics is all about, bargaining. So let me ask you this question, that whether this conflict, water conflict, including, Mahanadi water conflict, is it really strengthening Indian federalism or is it weakening the Indian federalism?
Um, very complex kind of thing, but certainly it is weakening the federal structure that we have. Certainly it is weakening so far. Uh, the examples that we can talk about in this context, for example, the way the Kaveri dispute has, grown over time. Now, in the last time when there was a conflict, all of us we had seen how there is a kind of hatredness towards one group of people or one state people against the another, and many a times what has happened is one state or the other, in this case Odisha also, has accused the central government of partisanship. Like in the case of Odisha, now 2017 is the time when we talk about, at that particular point of time in Satisguard we had the BJP in power, and in center the BJP was in power, and the Odisha government was demanding the formation of a tribunal, and it even went to the Supreme Court also, that the central government is delaying. And this is where the Odisha government accused the central government, the BJP-led government, that of partisanship. And this is not a good sign for Indian federal structure. That something has happened in the case of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So somewhere the other, when we have this kind of situation, when and one state is ruled by a political party and the same political party is at the central level, always the central government's action intention is questionable, howsoever good intention it may be. And therefore, this is not a very good sign for India's federal structure. This apart, when we talk about I try to bring in, since paucity of time, I didn't elaborate on that, and that is relating to the defiant states. Many times, the state governments have been very defiant, and we have seen in the case of especially Karnataka. Karnataka has been very, very defiant. Even in the case of Odisha also and Satisguard, the Mahanadi thing also we can look at in that context. How Odisha government was, the Satisguard government suggested that there can be a joint committee, there can be a joint board which can work on and try to find a solution which is acceptable to both Odisha and Satisguard and all that. But the government of Odisha rejected that. In turn, government of Odisha, demanded a tribunal. And we have seen the history of tribunals, especially in this context, interstate water disputes. The tribunals have not been able to actually completely resolve any dispute. So when we look at the present, scenario, the context, this is not a very good sign for India's federal structure. It is certainly weakening the federal structure because somewhere this is becoming a emotive issue. Identity politics is at play, and the political parties are trying to use water or weaponize water against another group of people, against another state people for their narrow political gain. And certainly it is not a good sign for Indian federal structure.
So thank you, Dr. Sahu, and let me mention that though we have few participants today, because this topic is very particular, and I am happy that two research scholars from our department, Roshan and Mukti, both are working on Mahanadi water dispute. So I want both of you to unmute your video, and I want both of you to engage your work with Dr. Sahu. Okay, they have already asked the question in the chat box, but can I see your face, Roshan and Mukti?
Somebody has written a big passage, but it disappeared actually. I could not read. Maybe you can share my email ID to them. My phone number also doesn't matter. They can write back to me. Or if they
Roshan has asked this question, and both Mukti and Roshan both are working on Mahanadi water dispute. I mean, Mukti has asked this question, sir, how did the federal relationship between Orissa and Satisguard in the Mahanadi river water dispute affect the power relations and strategic options?
Power relations and strategic options.
Yeah.
Now, let us see this, in a different way. Say, for example, as I, mentioned also earlier, for Odisha, for the government of Odisha, the political party that is in power, BJD in Odisha, Mahanadi issue is an issue which brings vote to them actually. So somewhere, this issue has been, wrecked off only at a particular point of time. See, if you go on talking to people all around, those who were, the 25,000 farmers or the 30,000 farmers in 2006 and 7, these farmers, they knew about the barrages which the government of Satisguard was proposing and was building across the Mahanadi and different tributaries of Mahanadi in the upper reaches way back in 2006. And the government of Odisha did not know about this. It's very ironical. The government of Odisha only ripped up this issue in 2016. That itself, speaks volumes about the intentions behind this. Now, when we talk about the power relation, in the post 2017, the government of Odisha seems not much interested again to engage with the government of Chhattisgarh, because there is a change in the government in Chhattisgarh, and Congress has come to power. Congress is not in power in center. In the case of Odisha, when we look at, you have the BJP, which seems to be the main opposition to the BJD in Odisha. And so long as the BJD was in power in Chhattisgarh and in center, the government of Odisha was engaging with the Chhattisgarh government. So when we talk about the power equation and all that, somewhere we can actually talk about the politics of vote, the politics for narrow political gain. These all are at a great play in such kind of situation. The similar kind of thing that we have seen in other cases also. Only the issues were raked off when their powers have been threatened. And when they are not threatened, they have forgotten these kind of issues. And this is what we have seen in the case of Mahanadi as well. So strategically, it has been used actually. And this has been the case with other similar kind of interstate river water conflict. I hope I could address your question.
Yes, I think it depends on the those who are asking question whether they are satisfied or not. But no answer is a final answer. I mean, you try to make sense out of that. Otherwise, you can also counter ask. Okay, let me go back to the question of Roshan. Now, Roshan is asking what falls from our roof is ours, says the Chhattisgarh. Again, Chhattisgarh also claimed that they are using the surplus water that is said unused into the Bay of Bengal. So, what is the concern of Odisha government to save the water from dying other than demanding the permanent Mahanadi water tribunal? And the second question is that I hope that you got the first question, or should I
Yes, yes,
repeat?
yes. Yes. No, no, I got it. Go ahead with the second question.
So, should I go for the second question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, the second question is that can the final award of Mahanadi Water Tribunal grant appropriate justice to the both governments in the near future in this river conflict?
Very interesting, actually. The second question I'll respond fast. When we talk about justice, you know, uh, I do not know whether both of them will get justice ever, because justice is something what we how we conceptualize it actually. So in the case of Orissa and Chhattisgarh, when we're talking about justice, the way it has been uninterruptedly happening over the years since 1957, if possibly Odisha wants that same thing back, that would never happen, because the barrages have already been constructed across the river Mahanadi in the upper reaches and all. When it comes to Chhattisgarh, they are not going to destroy the barrages that they have already constructed. See, there is something very, very vital in both the questions and in both the states that we are referring to in the case of Mahanadi. And this vital question is about their intentions, both the states and their intentions. Somewhere their intentions, what they speak is not the intention what actually they are doing. When we went to field work, my personal experience, along with two of the field assistants of me from the university, Samanta University. When we went around to Chhattisgarh, to Orissa and all that, we spoke to people all around. All of them, they had a common kind of response that the barrages, the dams, the governments, they are not interested. These dams and barrages are not being constructed for irrigation or for farmers or people in general. They are primarily being constructed for the industrial houses, for the industries. So both the state governments, in the case of Odisha also, when the 30,000 farmers or the 25,000 farmers who protested against the government of Odisha's action, government of Odisha, chief minister declared that not a single drop of water would be given to anybody else than the farmers. Only the surplus water would be given to the farmers. Similar kind of claim by the Satisguard government also for the Satisguard people. But then, when we look at the entire scenario, both the states, if you go to Chhattisgarh, the barrages that has been constructed, you can see visibly, it is visibly clear that it may be Jindal, it may be the Vedanta or many others who have constructed their own pump houses near the barrages, and they are drawing water for the industrial purposes. And the local people are aware about it, they know about it. In the case of Odisha also, go to the reservoir area, the Vedanta, Jindal, and others, similar kind of thing. So people have altogether a completely different opinion and they understand why the government is doing this and why the government says this, that only the surplus water would be given to the farmers. It is, of course, a different debate whether the industry should be there or not, they should get water or not. That is a different kind of thing that we can debate on that. But then the claim by Odisha government versus the Satisguard government that the surplus water is being given is a hoax, actually, I would say. There is no surplus water, because when we look at the entire Mahanadi, Mahanadi is dying actually. The capacity of Mahanadi to carry water, the natural flow, that has decreased to a great extent. And this has been a scientific study by the IIT Chennai and IIT Bombay. I think both of the IITs, they have made a study on this, that how the capacity of Mahanadi to carry water has depleted over time. Even the capacity of the Hirakud Dam also has also decreased over time. And therefore, when we're talking about surplus water, when we're talking about the water primarily being considered for farmers or the people in general, both these states somewhere are actually not telling the truth, we can say.
So thank you, Dr. Sahu. We don't have any other questions. Now we have reached the last part of this event. Now I request our PG student Trilochan to provide vote of thanks to our speaker. Yes, Trilochan. Trilochan, we cannot hear you.
A very good evening to one and all. Esteemed keynote speaker of this web talk, Dr. Samanta Sahu sir, and convener of this web talk, Dr. Himanshu Sekhar Mishra sir, respected Dr. Tanmay Seth ma'am, and other delegate persons who participate and make this talk success. Thank you so much, sir, that I have got an opportunity to provide vote of thanks. So thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker for such a great presentation on understanding Mahanadi water dispute between Orissa and Satisguard. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing personal experience that you have said about an interview to understand importance of water resource. Not only water resource, but also other natural resource. And thank you, sir, for Narmada to understand the Narmada Bachao Andolan, Chipko movement, and other Kaveri movement also. And also for importance of Hirakud Dam to Odisha, and others topic like lasses fair conflict theory and game theory. Thank you so much, sir. And I would also thankful to our convener, and I would like to say that we are fortunate that we are the students of Dr. Mishra sir. Because of him, we are getting chance to interact with various dignitaries persons from various universities through this webinar. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Mukti sir, for introducing this topic, understanding Mahanadi water disputes. And I would also like to thanks others participants who joined and also for their queries. At last but not the least, I would like to thanks all the participants and thank you, sir.
So thank you, Trilochan. I think without any preparation, I just gave this assignment to Trilochan just 5-10 minutes before. Okay, you will give the vote of thanks. You did it wonderfully. Yes, on the behalf of all, I am also thankful to Dr. Sahu and to all others who have joined this web talk. I think the main purpose of this talk is to develop a perspective, right? So whatever the speaker is saying, one need to understand, and the perspective or the approach the speaker is adopting while deliberating. I think that is something crucial for the participants to understand and know. So I hope that I got a perspective. I think that it will help me as a guide of Mukti to supervise his piece of PhD research work. So thank you, Dr. Sahu. Thank you for your deliberation, and thank you that your research on Mahanadi water dispute, and you said that it was successfully accepted by the Indian Council of Social Science Research. So thank you once again. So good night. Good night, all of you.